What if the modern world runs on the same logic as a con? Not in some shady alleyway, but in the gleaming towers of global finance. Every dollar saved, every pension built, every mortgage payment made, all depend on a structure that needs new money to survive. It looks respectable, it feels solid, but its core mechanism is identical to the oldest trick in financial history, a pyramid that must keep growing or die. The unsettling truth is that this logic isn't confined to scams. It is the system. And the only reason it still stands is because governments and banks keep feeding it new participants, new credit, and new illusions. The question isn't whether this structure will eventually fail. The real question is who will be crushed when it does. To see why, we need to go back to the beginning, to understand what a pyramid scheme really is. The idea itself is simple. It promises extraordinary returns but produces no real value. The profits of early investors are paid with the money of those who come later. It grows by belief, not by productivity. Charles Ponzi made this model infamous in the early 1920s when he promised investors a 50% profit in just 3 months. At first it worked, at least on paper. He paid the first investors with funds from the next wave, creating the illusion of success. Crowds lined up to hand him their savings, convinced they'd found a miracle. But the math behind it was merciless. Each new layer demanded more recruits than the last. Within months, the entire structure imploded, leaving thousands ruined. Ponzi went to prison, but his name lived on. Shorthand for every scheme that needs endless growth in a finite world. Now remove the illegal labels, and the same dynamic appears everywhere. Governments borrow not from wealth they have, but from generations yet unborn. Corporations take on mountains of debt to buy back their own shares, enriching a few while pushing the cost into the future. Families live on borrowed money, paying interest that never seems to end. And the money itself, it's no longer tied to gold, silver, or anything real. It's created from nothing every time a loan is made. That's the part most people never see. Money isn't printed in vaults the way we imagine. It's conjured into being through lending. Under the system known as fractional reserve banking, if you deposit $1,000, your bank keeps only a fraction, perhaps 1/10 in reserve. The rest is lent out. That loan becomes new money when it's deposited elsewhere where another fraction is kept and the remainder lent again. From a single deposit, the system multiplies several times that amount in credit. On paper, everyone appears richer. In reality, it's just layers of claims stacked upon each other, fragile as glass. The machine keeps running only while people believe their deposits are safe and don't all ask for them back at once. When that belief cracks, panic follows. Bank runs, collapses, and desperate rescues. We've seen it before, in the 1930s with the Great Depression and again in the 2000s with the global financial crisis. This didn't appear overnight. It has roots in history. After the Second World War, nations rebuilt under an agreement known as Bretton Woods, which tied the United States dollar to gold. It was a promise of stability, money linked to something tangible. But in the early 1970s, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window, breaking that link. From that moment, the global economy was built entirely on fiat money, currency declared valuable by governments and backed only by trust. And trust, as history shows, is fragile. Once the anchor of gold was gone, the only way to keep faith alive was to promise endless growth. Growth funded by debt, growth maintained by inflation, growth extracted from human labor. The pyramid was reborn, not as a scam in a basement, but as the operating system of the modern world. You can see it in pensions and Social Security. Those payments don't come from the money you personally set aside. They come from the contributions of younger workers paying today. It functions only while the base of contributors keeps expanding. But in aging societies, Japan, Italy, even the United States, that base is shrinking. Fewer young workers, more retirees, mounting obligations. The math breaks again. Governments fill the gap by borrowing more and printing more, but every patch deepens the hole. Housing tells the same story. For decades, property values rose not because homes produced greater value, but because buyers could borrow ever larger sums. Each boom needed new entrants willing to take on new debt. But when affordability collapses, the pyramid loses its base. The illusion breaks, and wealth evaporates overnight. Even the stock market echoes the same rhythm. Prices rise less from what companies earn than from what investors expect others will pay tomorrow. The logic isn't profit, it's faith in future buyers. Cryptocurrencies push the pattern to its extreme. Early adopters profit only if enough latecomers believe in the token's worth. But to single out crypto misses the point. The entire financial system now relies on the same belief loop. Endless growth, endless credit, endless confidence. When that confidence wavers, the master magician steps in, the central bank. In the crisis of the 2000s, when the housing bubble burst, central banks printed trillions to save the structure. They called it quantitative easing, a phrase that sounds technical but meant one thing: creating new money to replace the old. The losses of the few were spread across the many. The debts weren't erased. They were expanded, shifted, relayered. The pyramid didn't collapse. It was rebuilt, taller than before. And the cost? You can see it in every paycheck that buys a little less each year, in every savings account losing quiet value through inflation, in every promise that future generations must now honor. The damage is disguised as progress, yet the mechanism remains the same. Old debts paid with new money, belief preserved at all costs. History offers plenty of warnings. The South Sea bubble in the early 1800s, where investors chased fantasies of overseas trade. The crash of the 1930s, when speculation turned to ruin. Japan's asset bubble of the 1980s, when Tokyo land was priced higher than all of California. Every one of these booms shared the same DNA. Systems that depended on endless new money and endless belief until reality intervened. And here we are again. We've stopped calling it a pyramid and started calling it growth. But the mechanism hasn't changed. If a system can survive only through constant injections of new debt and new believers, then it isn't a foundation. It's a structure balanced on hope. And maybe you and I are standing at its base, holding it up. Today, the pyramid is larger than at any point in history. Global debt has climbed beyond $300 trillion, roughly 3 times the world's entire yearly economic output. Think about that. Humanity owes 3 years of labor before breaking even. And yet the prescription from politicians, economists, and central bankers remains the same. More borrowing, more spending, more faith that tomorrow will somehow pay for today. It's the logic of a Ponzi scheme that everyone recognizes, but no one dares to stop. Because if it stops, the whole structure falls. This is why inflation always returns. Inflation isn't an accident of bad policy or supply shocks. It's the quiet tax built into the system itself, the mechanism by which the pyramid sustains its weight. Prices rise not simply because of demand, but because new money keeps flooding the system each time governments run deficits or central banks rescue the markets. When money grows faster than real value, the result is inevitable. Your savings buy less, your pension stretches thinner, your salary lags behind the cost of living. Inflation is how the system demands its tribute. It whispers, "We'll survive another year, but you will pay." And while prices rise, demographics are working against it. In the wealthy nations of the West, pensions and Social Security depend on a simple assumption: that a large generation of workers will always support a smaller generation of retirees. But that balance has reversed. Birth rates are falling. Life expectancy keeps rising. The foundation is eroding. In Japan, more adult diapers are sold than baby ones, a haunting symbol of a society top-heavy with age. Europe follows close behind. The United States isn't far off. This isn't just a demographic story. It's a financial time bomb. Every retiree draws from a system that now has fewer hands feeding it. Without growth, the flow of money upward cannot continue. The pyramid strains under its own promises, and yet, the same medicine is prescribed again and again. Rescue. Every crash of the last century tells the same story. The Great Depression led to vast government programs and an expansion of paper money. The oil crises of the 1970s brought the petrodollar system, recycling oil profits through American debt to keep global liquidity alive. The housing collapse of the 2000s unleashed trillions in quantitative easing. The pandemic of the 2020s brought even more, at scales no one had imagined. Each time the remedy was not reform, but expansion. The pyramid grew, absorbing the shock and pushing the reckoning further into the future. No one wanted to face collapse. Everyone preferred another round of belief. And belief, after all, is the true currency here. Those who sit near the top understand this better than anyone. Banks earn interest on money created from nothing. Corporations issue debt to buy back their own stock, enriching executives whose bonuses depend on rising prices. Politicians promise benefits they know will be paid by others long after they're gone. And ordinary workers, the savers, the taxpayers, the latecomers, carry the burden quietly, thinking the system is designed for them. But it isn't. Inflation, debt, bailouts, these are not flaws. They are features. They are how the machine preserves itself. Once you recognize that, you can't unsee it. The global economy may not be legally a pyramid scheme, but structurally it behaves like one. It must grow to survive. It must recruit new believers to maintain faith. It must promise returns it cannot truly deliver. And every layer depends on the next one holding firm. So what keeps it from collapsing outright? Power. Governments can print money. They can enforce taxes. They can wage wars to secure resources. Ponzi never had those tools. That's why this version of the pyramid has lasted so long. Not because it's sound, but because it's enforceable. It's a belief system backed by law and, when necessary, by force. Still, no pyramid can expand forever. When the base weakens, when credit dries up, when birth rates fall, when trust fades, gravity reclaims the illusion. The higher the structure, the harder the fall. History's rhythm is clear. Systems built on faith rather than production eventually face the moment when faith runs out. That's why understanding this isn't cynicism. It's clarity. Once you see how the mechanism works, you stop expecting the system to protect you. You realize that financial security sold by the state or the bank is not the same as actual resilience. True wealth doesn't live in promises. It lives in what survives outside the system. Skills that create value, relationships that outlast currencies, assets that hold worth even when confidence collapses. The lesson is simple, though not easy. The path to stability begins by stepping out of the illusion. Waiting for governments or markets to rescue you only tightens the trap. Learning how the machine operates and building a life that doesn't depend on its constant expansion is the only real form of freedom left. Look closely and you'll notice that history repeats this pattern under different names. In one century, it's a bubble in trade routes. In another, it's a frenzy over technology or housing. Each generation swears it's different this time. Each finds new vocabulary to justify the same addiction to growth. And each eventually discovers that belief cannot outpace reality forever. That's the echo of history. It doesn't repeat in detail, but it rhymes in structure. And the rhyme here is unmistakable. The moment you mistake a pyramid for a foundation, you stand beneath something destined to fall. So if the global economy isn't collapsing yet, it's not because it's healthy. It's because the architects keep adding scaffolds to hold it upright. New money, new rules, new believers. But no structure built on endless expansion can last indefinitely. The math, the demographics, the psychology all point to the same truth. Every system that requires infinite growth, it eventually meets a finite world. When that day comes, it won't announce itself with panic. It will unfold slowly, through inflation that feels endless, through wages that never catch up, through governments that quietly borrow against futures they'll never see. Collapse isn't sudden, it's gradual disbelief. And maybe that's the real danger, not that the pyramid will fall one day, but that people will keep holding it up long after they know it's hollow. Because belief, even in decay, is powerful. It's what keeps the lights on, the markets open, the illusion alive. But illusions, like credit, always expire. And when they do, the sound you hear isn't chaos. It's history rhyming once again.